Right. Yeah, don't hold your breath on that. That's not going to happen. That's more than 2.5 times the annual budget of California. The annual budget is $300 billion. So I appreciate the economists doing their calculations, but at the end of the day, and I'm all for repairing the damage of slavery, racism, Jim Crow segregation, redlining, housing discrimination, educational discrimination when it comes to getting bank loans and home loans and all of that. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you think that you're owed. The only thing that matters is how much you can collect, or what you can collect, and what you can actually keep once it goes to court and you get sued and people try to block you from getting what you say that you're owed. Okay. So when we look at this, so two developments happened. Number one, there was the article from ABC Channel 7, abc7.com, which they picked up from the Associated Press, called Reparations for Black Californians Could Top $800 billion. And this was what economists came up with. And as you stated, it didn't include theft of land and different things like this, right? Secondly, the article that came out today from the Associated Press, March 30th, 2023, California reparations amount, if any, left to politicians, because the California Reparations Task Force is leaving it up to the politicians in the state assembly in California to really put a price tag on it and determine what should be paid out.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Let's talk about reparations. Another development came up over the past couple of days, and as it relates to reparations for the state of California. Of course, California has been on the forefront creating a reparations task force, which is deemed with having the conversations and really creating a model on how the state of California, one of the largest states in the country, could possibly issue reparations. Now, there have been much talk about this, and I want to bring my brother Michael Imhotep back into the conversation as we look at this situation of reparations in the state of California. But here's the big development is, Brother Michael, is the cost, a budget-busting cost for the state of California. Take a look at this, folks. It could cost California more than $800 billion to compensate Black residents for generations of over-policing, disproportionate incarceration, and housing discrimination. Economists have told a state panel considering reparations. The preliminary estimate is more than 2.5 times more than California's $300 billion annual budget, and does not include a recommended $1 million per older Black resident for health disparities that have shortened their average lifespan, nor does the figure count for compensating people for property unjustly taken by the government or devaluing Black businesses. And it says that for devaluing Black businesses, two other harms the task force says the state perpetuated. Wow. $800 billion. Brother Michael.
Right. Yeah, don't hold your breath on that. That's not going to happen. That's more than 2.5 times the annual budget of California. The annual budget is $300 billion. So I appreciate the economists doing their calculations, but at the end of the day, and I'm all for repairing the damage of slavery, racism, Jim Crow segregation, redlining, housing discrimination, educational discrimination when it comes to getting bank loans and home loans and all of that. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you think that you're owed. The only thing that matters is how much you can collect, or what you can collect, and what you can actually keep once it goes to court and you get sued and people try to block you from getting what you say that you're owed. Okay. So when we look at this, so two developments happened. Number one, there was the article from ABC Channel 7, abc7.com, which they picked up from the Associated Press, called Reparations for Black Californians Could Top $800 billion. And this was what economists came up with. And as you stated, it didn't include theft of land and different things like this, right? Secondly, the article that came out today from the Associated Press, March 30th, 2023, California reparations amount, if any, left to politicians, because the California Reparations Task Force is leaving it up to the politicians in the state assembly in California to really put a price tag on it and determine what should be paid out. They refer to Attorney Camila Moore, the leader of California's first in the nation reparations task force, on Wednesday, March 29th, said it won't take a stance on how much the state could compensate Black residents whom economists estimate may be owed more than $800 billion for decades of over-policing, disproportionate incarceration and housing discrimination. So it's I think it's good that they don't put a price tag on it now, the California Reparations Task Force, because whatever price tag you put on it, and the greater the price tag, the more it's going to be attacked. Because in the article from ABC Channel 7, they also talk about the argument against reparations as well. So you have to defend yourself and strengthen your argument to defend against those arguments against reparations. One of them is that, well, you know, there was somebody they quoted to say, well, my family came here. They were white, of course. They said, my family came here after slavery ended and didn't have anything to do with slavery, things like this. Now, it's important to understand. I encourage everybody who's watching this, I encourage you to read at least the executive order, the executive summary, I should say, the 28-page executive summary from the California Reparations Task Force 500-page report. Because if you read that executive summary, it gives you a greater understanding of U.S. history and what happened to us, as well as history of California. And it outlines 12 harms. It outlines 12 harms: political disenfranchisement, racial terror, housing discrimination, separate and unequal education, racism in environment and infrastructure, pathologizing the Black family, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, stolen and hindered opportunity, unjust legal system, mental and physical harm and neglect, and the wealth gap as well. Okay, so the best strategy in California and nationally at the federal level to get something tangible that we can keep, because with 13.5% of the population nationwide, California, African Americans are 5.5% to 6% of the population. Shift the focus away from talking about slavery, because California really does not have a history of slavery. They've identified about 1,500 African Americans that were in a semi-slavery status of 1850 and afterward, when California came into the Union as a free state. Shift the focus to present day structural inequities. Deal with the laws and policies that were put in place to bring about those structural inequities. And then you can trace that back into history and show how it's related to slavery. But one of the most important things we have to understand is take the title reparations off of it. The reason why is when you talk about reparations and you put that title on what it is that you want, you automatically bring up a whole lot of resistance to it from the larger community before you even get to talk about what it is that you want. Okay, so take the title off of it.
Market it differently.
You gotta market it totally different. When you are the minority population in the city, state, country, and the majority of the people that gotta vote for what you want are white. Okay, you've got to market it different if you actually want to accomplish something and be able to keep what you want. Okay,
all right, so let me ask
just real quick. Focus on the policies that you want and push the policies that you want. One, right. Two, show how those policies will not just help you, but how repairing that damage will also help the larger community, the country, etc. You have to market this differently.
One of the things that you mentioned was, you know, the approach that the Reparations Task Force is taking, which is allowing the state government to determine what the price should be.
Because the state government has to vote on this.
Because they got to vote on it.
Yes.
So my thinking is, and my question to you, Brother Michael, is that an effective strategy, considering the fact that, you know, you have an economist that's throwing it out there, 800 billion.
That ain't gonna happen.
Right? Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen either. I mean, the state is not going to give up 2.5 times more of its budget for a single group of people.
For 5.5% of the population of California, 6%? Hell no. Just like in California, that's not, and just like in San Francisco. Okay.
But should we be determining? I guess my question would be: should the task force determine what the cost should be? Because if you put it in the hands of politicians, couldn't we shortchange? Wouldn't that put us in a position to shortchange ourselves? If they say, okay, we want to give y'all 200 million, or okay, let's say we'll give you 100 million.
I would focus on the policies that you need to repair the damage. Okay. If you read the 28-page executive summary, have you read the executive summary?
Not yet.
Read it. If you read the 28-page executive summary, those different harms that I talked about, they go through and explain those harms, how they took place in California, and how they harmed African Americans. It was laws and policies that inflicted the harm upon us and continue to do it. It's going to be laws and policies that correct the harm. Cash payments can be part of, and once again, we have to have comprehensive reparations. Cash payments can be part of a comprehensive repairing of the damage or dealing with the structural inequities. But when you start coming out with these amounts that are greater, 2.5 times greater than your annual budget, or 7 times greater than your annual budget, like in San Francisco, that's not going to happen. And what happens is that the opposition attacks those huge numbers without giving any other details.
Right.
They just attack those huge numbers.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Let me go to the culture crew and get their take on this, because this is, and again, like you said, like this could, by an economist putting this type of information out there, it does more harm than good to the larger effort, right?
And they probably meant well. The economists probably meant well with it.
Right.
But see, it's just like San Francisco, right? The $5 million per eligible African American. If 20,000 out of 50,000 African Americans qualify for that, you're talking about $100 billion. That's 7 times greater. That's 7 times the annual budget of San Francisco, which has a $14 billion annual budget, and they're facing a $728 million budget deficit over the next 2 years. That's fantasy. That's fantasy. Now, at the meeting where that was proposed in San Francisco, there were 111 policy recommendations made. They don't even get a second look because people are focused on Fantasy Island. And that's how you tank the whole reparations movement, by just putting these numbers out here. Even though people mean well, focus on the policies that you need, push the policies to repair the damage, as opposed to these huge dollar amounts that are astronomical. Even though you could say, hey, we are owed this. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we think we're owed or what we can even prove. What matters is what you can actually collect and keep after you get sued.
Absolutely. I'm gonna stop the conversation right there, because I think that's the salient point. It's about what you can collect. Like, you got to come to the table
collect and keep.
And collect and keep. And you got to come to the table with something reasonable. Otherwise, they might throw the whole thing out the window. Exactly.
And if you look at the executive order that President Joe Biden did on student loan forgiveness, absolutely, it's definitely needed. What he did is reasonable, but it's being tied up in court because you have Republicans suing. Hopefully, the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court will rule in his favor, which is our favor as well, because it greatly benefits African Americans. But it's based upon what you can actually keep. That's what we have to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother Michael, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, brother. Real quick, talk to us about the work you're doing.
TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I teach online history classes on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next class, April 1st. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, where they didn't teach you in school. And you can register for the full course. Full course is on sale, only $80. You can register per class if you want to, which is only $10. And then on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, we go through and look at history chronologically to understand what happened to us after slavery ended, what led up to the Civil War taking place, what were the laws and policies to put us in the predicament we are in today, to understand where we need to go from here. Mm-hmm. Your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can watch the classes live or on demand, and the content is PG-13, so you can use this with your children and your family as well. TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com.
There it is, Brother Michael Imhotep. You can find him weekly here on The Culture, as well as Roland Martin Unfiltered. We always appreciate our brother checking in. Thank you, Brother
All right.
Michael.
Thanks, Farajii. All right.
Yes,
Peace.
sir. Peace.
Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. So we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. Classes on sale, $80, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. The next classes are Saturday, April 1st, Saturday, April 8th, Saturday, April 15th, and Saturday, April 22nd. Do the classes normally 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can register for one class session for $10 also. Now, even after the courses are over with, after 12 weeks is over with, you still have full access. You can go back and watch the classes anytime, so it does not expire. All right. So this is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And today's class we'll continue our discussion dealing with Egypt on the Potomac and how the layout of Washington, D.C. is a copy of the layout of Ancient Kemet, Ancient Egypt. We'll also talk about Hannibal Barca and the Punic Wars and fighting against Rome. And we'll talk about the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. On Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. So we're doing that Sunday, April 2nd, Sunday, April 9th, April 16th, April 23rd, okay, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So register for that class as well. And we have a bundle pack of online courses. You can register for both classes for only $120. That's a $300 value. You also get 5 of my lectures free that will be in the video library. And you can watch those because those lectures you can watch at our online school. All right. So visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, to register for the classes. I just posted the link here on the thread of the broadcast, and you can join us for today's class also once you register. All right. How's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Saturday, April 1st, 2023, and we are live. So I'm teaching a online history course today, very shortly. But I wanted to come on and talk about this topic that we discussed on Farajii Muhammad's show, The Culture, on Thursday. That was Thursday, March 30th, 2023. And I wanted to do a broadcast after the show, but I did not get a chance to deal with this. So we talked about how the California Reparations Task Force, how some economists working on the California Reparations Task Force have estimated that reparations for African Americans in California that qualify, reparations could total $800 billion. Okay, this is 2.5 times, over 2.5 times the annual budget of California, which is $300 billion a year. So I want to look at a couple articles that we talked about, specifically the one from the Associated Press from Thursday, March 30th, that breaks this down so we can get a better understanding of this and stop dealing with a lot of fantasy also. Okay, we're also going to briefly look at the executive summary of the 28-page, the executive summary of the 500-page study that the Reparations Task Force released June 1st, 2022. And I encourage everybody to go read that study, at least read the 28-page executive summary, because if you do, then you understand a lot of this stuff floating around about reparations is just totally false. And it comes from a lack of understanding of history and law. So if we look at this article from March 29th, this was Thursday. Let me see. This was this article from the Associated Press. California reparations amount, if any, left to politicians. This is from Wednesday, March 29th, 2023. And in the article, it says that the leader of California's first in the nation reparations task force on Wednesday, March 29th, on Wednesday said, hold on, let me back up here just a second. I can't increase the size of it. Okay, on Wednesday, said that it won't take a stance on how the state should compensate Black residents who economists estimate may be owed more than $800 billion for decades of over-policing, disproportionate incarceration, and housing discrimination. The $800 billion is more than 2.5 times California's $300 billion annual budget, and it does not include a recommended $1 million per older Black resident for health disparities that have shortened their average lifespan, okay, that have shortened their average lifespan. Nor does the figure count compensating people for property unjustly taken by the California state government, or devaluing Black businesses, which are two other harms the California Reparations Task Force says the state perpetuated. Okay, so the $800 billion is a combination of looking at some various harms. We'll look at that. Okay, now the $800 billion, even though it may be justified, that's not going to happen. That's totally unrealistic. That's more than 2.5 times California's annual budget of $300 billion a year. That's not going to happen. Okay, so don't wait for anything like that to take place. It's also important to understand that California does not have a history of slavery like other states have. California comes into the Union in 1850 as a free state. Okay, and if we look here at the executive summary, this is the executive summary from the, let's look at this here. This is the executive summary. So 28-page executive summary, everybody should read. And this is from the interim report, okay, 2022. And I'll give you the link for it also. It talks about in here how California comes into the Union in 1850 as a free state. Now, they identified about 1,500 African Americans who were in a semi-slavery state. Okay, but California didn't have that type of history of slavery. Okay, like Alabama or Georgia or Texas or Mississippi, nothing like that. California does have a rampant history of voter suppression, housing segregation, redlining, theft of land, segregation when it comes to schools, discrimination when it comes to getting bank loans, all different types of things like this. And the report lays out 12 harms as well. And you need laws and policies to correct those harms. Okay, so we'll come back to this. This was page, what page was that of the executive summary? Page 7 of the executive summary. And the executive summary alone is an excellent history lesson. Okay, now, if we look at this article here, if we go back to this. So Thomas Kramer, who was a public policy professor at the University of Connecticut, told the California Reparations Task Force panel on Wednesday, March 29th, he said all forms of discrimination should be considered in reparations. The task force should feel free to go beyond our loss estimates, and determine what the right amount would be. Okay, now, Black residents may not receive cash payments anytime soon. There's no may there. They're not going to receive cash payments anytime soon, if ever, because the state legislature and Governor Gavin Newsom will ultimately decide whether any reparations are to be paid. The task force faces a July 1st, 2023 deadline to recommend the forms of compensation to be awarded and who should receive it, along with other remedies to repair the harm, Now, the chair of the California Reparations Task Force is attorney Camila Moore. She said on Wednesday that it's up to the state legislature to ascribe a restitution amount based on the methodology economists recommended, and which the task force approved on Wednesday. Now, she said the task force is pretty much done regarding the compensation component. Our task was to create a methodology for calculation for various forms of compensation that correspond with our findings. She said this in an email. Now, for those who support reparations, the staggering $800 billion estimate underscores the long-lasting harm that African Americans have endured, even in a state that never officially endorsed slavery, Also, right around 1849, when Peter Burnett was governor of California, he was the first governor of California. He came from Oregon because he was the governor of Oregon also. They tried to ban all free African Americans in the state of California. Now, that didn't work, but they attempted to do that also. Now, several people who gave public comment Wednesday spoke of the urgent need to pay Black Americans for all that was taken from them. Charlton Curry of Sacramento, California, who discusses reparations on his Big C Sports podcast, said, my family came from the South because they were running for their lives. They were fearful of being lynched just for voting. He said cash payments are necessary. Money talks. He said, noting that white people benefited from free U.S. government land through the 1862 Homestead Act, and Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II and Jewish Holocaust victims received payments. We talked about Japanese Americans. That was approximately 82,250 of them that got a one-time payment of $20,000 that did not go to descendants of Japanese Americans. That only went to those who were still alive, who had been put into the internment camps between basically 1941 and 1945, or who had to flee or something like that. So it only went to a fraction of the Japanese Americans in this country. Jewish Holocaust victims are receiving reparations, or what they're receiving is a pension, but that's coming from the German government. That's not coming from the U.S. government. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave away land. It was 160 acres of land, but you had to maintain that land for 5 years and you had to pay the taxes on that land, and you had to make the structural improvements on that land. After 5 years, you can keep the land. So it wasn't totally free land. If we look at the Homestead Act, and we teach about this in my Sunday class, where we deal with Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. And you can register for my online classes at our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. On Saturdays, I teach ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we have another session of that class that I'm teaching today as soon as I finish with this broadcast. So we'll start about 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll give you information about that also. But this is on the Homestead Act. Is very important for us to deal with facts and evidence and know what it is that we're talking about, because there's so much misinformation floating out there and people don't document what they're talking about. So this comes from history.com, the official website of the History Channel. Homestead Act. The 1862 Homestead Act accelerated settlement of U.S. Western Territory by allowing any American, including freed slaves, to put in a claim for up to 160 free acres of federal land. Okay, now the most former slaves are going to be shut out of this, even though you're going to have a few that get it, but most of us were shut out of this. Now, the Homestead Act signed by President Abraham Lincoln granted Americans 160-acre plots of public land for the price of a small filing fee. For the price of a small filing fee, the Civil War era act, considered one of the United States' most important pieces of legislation, led to westward expansion and allowed citizens of all walks of life, including the formerly enslaved, women, and immigrants, to become landowners. Okay, that's in theory. What was the Homestead Act? In a July 4th, 1861 speech, President Abraham Lincoln told the nation the purpose of America's government was to evaluate the condition of men, to lift artificial burdens from all shoulders, and to give everyone an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life, end quote. Now, he followed through with the passage of the Homestead Act, which remained active for 124 years until it was repealed in 1976 and resulted in 10% of U.S. land, or 270 million acres, to be claimed and settled. So they gave away land for over 100 years with the Homestead Act. The incentive to move, okay, let me scroll down. I'll go past this. But to achieve this, thousands of Native Americans were forced from their lands and onto Indian reservations to make way for homesteaders. Okay, now, requirements for the Homestead Act. To make a claim, homesteaders paid a filing fee of $18, a $10 fee to make a temporary claim on the land, $2 for commission to the land agent, and an additional $6 final payment to receive an official patent on the land. Land titles could also be purchased from the government for $1.25 per acre following 6 months of proven residency. Additional requirements included 5 years of continuous residence on the land, building a home on the land, farming the land, and making improvements. So these were requirements to be able to take advantage of the Homestead Act and keep the land. It wasn't just free land given. People say that when you go read the details, you see that wasn't just free land given. Now, homesteaders who had to be the head of a household or 21 years of age had to certify that they had never borne arms against the United States. So that means they were not part of the Confederacy that took up arms against the Union. Also needed 2 neighbors or friends to attest to the government that they had fulfilled the requirements. Union soldiers could shave off time served in the U.S. Civil War from the 5-year residency requirement. Okay. So read the rest of this here, but it's important when people say, oh, they just gave away free land. No, that's not exactly what happened there. There were requirements, and you had to build a house on that land. You had to pay the registration fee. You had to make improvements on that land. Also, you had to farm on that land. Now, it was a huge deal. It was a good deal. And we largely got discriminated from being able to take advantage of that land after we were the ones who grew the crops, tilled the land, things like this for 246 years. But I want to make it clear that wasn't just free land given away as oftentimes it is described. Okay, now, if we go back to this article here from the Associated Press, let's see here. me grab the article again. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, let's continue here. How's everybody doing? Also, you can register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we're going to start this class as soon as I get finished here with this broadcast. I'm waiting on people to log in. And I wanted to do this broadcast here right after I did Farajii's show on Thursday, but I didn't get a chance to. I was too tired and couldn't do it Friday. I had to do Roland Martin's show on Friday. Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. So we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. Classes on sale, $80, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. The next classes are Saturday, April 1st, Saturday, April 8th, Saturday, April 15th, and Saturday, April 22nd. Do the classes normally 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can register for one class session for $10 also. Now, even after the courses are over with, after the 12 weeks is over with, you still have full access. You can go back and watch the classes anytime, so it does not expire. All right. So this is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And today's class we'll continue our discussion dealing with Egypt on the Potomac and how the layout of Washington, D.C. is a copy of the layout of Ancient Kemet, Ancient Egypt. We'll also talk about Hannibal Barca and the Punic Wars and fighting against Rome. And we'll talk about the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. On Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. So we're doing that Sunday, April 2nd, Sunday, April 9th, April 16th, April 23rd, okay, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So register for that class as well. And we have a bundle pack of online courses. You can register for both classes for only $120. That's a $300 value. You also get 5 of my lectures free that will be in the video library. And you can watch those because those lectures you can watch at our online school. All right. So visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, to register for the classes. I just posted the link here on the thread of the broadcast, and you can join us for today's class also once you register. Okay. Let me go back to this article here. And unfortunately, most of the stuff floating around about reparations is just blatantly false, not just California, but just in general. And too many of our people don't understand history. This is why it's important to read the study from the California Reparations Task Force. Because if you actually read that study, especially if you only read like the 28-page executive summary, you realize how much of this history you don't understand. Okay. Because they go through, lay it out, and they lay out 12 harms as well that are the result of laws and policies. And these are harms that you have to pass laws and policies to correct. Okay, now, critics pin their opposition to reparations to California partly on the fact that California was never a slave state, and say current taxpayers could not be responsible for damage linked to events that germinated hundreds of years ago. Okay. Bob Woodson, a prominent Black conservative, calls reparations impractical, controversial, and counterproductive. okay, impractical, controversial, and counterproductive. He said no amount of money could ever make right the evil of slavery, and it is insulting to suggest that it could. He said this in an email to the Associated Press, adding that Black communities relied on faith and family to build thriving communities following slavery. Some of these communities only began coming apart after we lost sight of these values, which also hold the key to these communities' restoration. Okay, he doesn't talk about the fact that 41,000 miles of U.S. interstate highways ran through the African American community, wiping out thousands of businesses, thousands of homes. See, this is the type of misinformation a lot of these Black conservatives put out. And then they want to talk about faith and family. They don't talk about the war on drugs that their Republican president, Richard Nixon, declared June 17, 1971, and how the U.S. prison population quadruples from 1970 to 1993. It goes from about 300,000 in 1970 to 1.3 million in 1993. This is before the 94 crime bill that everybody loves to talk about, but really don't even understand. That wasn't signed on September 13, 1994. The U.S. prison population quadrupled before that was even signed. That goes back to Richard Nixon, who declared his war on drugs June 17, 1974. But if you read this article here dealing with bulldozed and bisected, this is an analysis from NBC News, and it goes through and shows the harm that the expressway system did in the African American community. Okay, this article here. So these are things that a lot of these Black conservatives don't talk about. Bulldozed and bisected. So what is this here? Bulldozed and bisected. Highway construction built a legacy of inequality. Highway construction built a legacy of inequality. Will their removal heal historic wounds? And in the article, it talks about what has changed decades after the Federal Highway Act of 1956. So you had the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts in 1952 and 1956. It brought 41,000 miles of interstate highways to the United States. It's the recognition of the harm that was done to communities left in the shade of these now aging roadways. From 1957 to 1957, 1977, the Federal Aid Highway Act displaced over 475,000 households and 1 million people, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Now, as many of these hulking structures reach obsolescence, the federal government and many states and cities are belatedly recognizing the harm they caused and are working with communities to design alternatives that repair the damage. But in many cases, those plans are reopening old wounds and leading to protracted debates that politicians and engineers are struggling to solve. One of more than 50 interstate highways across the country nearing the end of their lifespan, of more than 50 interstate highways across the country nearing the end of their lifespan, NBC News examined 3 urban neighborhoods that show the range of proposals underway to redress the harms caused by the construction of interstates. Okay, so you can read the rest of this. And in the one of the things that the San Francisco Reparations Task Force was talking about was the Fillmore District in San Francisco, California, and how the expressways ran through the Fillmore District, wiped out 883 businesses, displaced about 20,000 people, most of them African Americans. Okay, this is the legacy of that history and those federal programs. All right, now we go back to the Associated Press article from Wednesday, March 29th, or Thursday, March 30th, Wednesday, March 29th. Yeah. Okay. So it says financial redress is just one part of the package being considered. Financial redress is just one part of the package being considered. Other proposals include paying incarcerated inmates market value for their labor, establishing free wellness centers, and planting more trees in Black communities, banning cash bail, and adopting a K through 12 Black studies curriculum. All right. So as I've said before, is not going to just be one policy implemented. Is going to be a multitude of policies implemented. We have to have comprehensive reparations. It's not just going to be one thing. We have to have comprehensive reparations. More trees in the African American community relates to environmental issues, and it deals with trees give off oxygen. They also provide shade. Okay. This deals with how suburban communities are more likely to have more trees. They have cleaner air, generally speaking. When you have more shade, it lowers the temperatures, like even on hot days. It lowers the temperatures in the neighborhood, which reduces your energy costs overall, generally speaking. So you don't have to use as much energy to keep your homes cool, etc. In African American communities, inner cities, you have more concrete with less trees. And the concrete like absorbs heat, and it causes an increase in the temperatures in those areas. So there is a, let me pull this up here. There's some articles I've seen on this. A second here. Let me take a look at this. Okay, so for instance, if we look at this article from NPR, National Public Radio, from January 14th, 2020. This is why it's important. You have to understand history to understand the laws and policies put in place that inflicted the harm, to know what has to be repaired, to understand the damage that has to be repaired. All right. So for instance, let's look at this. Racist housing practices from the 1930s linked to hotter neighborhoods today. Racist housing practices from the 1930s linked to hotter neighborhoods today. January 14, 2020, NPR.org, National Public Radio, by Meg Anderson. In cities around the country, if you want to understand the history of a neighborhood, you might want to do the same thing you do to measure human health. Check its temperature. That's what a group of researchers did. And they found that neighborhoods with higher temperatures were often the same ones subjected to discriminatory, race-based housing practices nearly a century ago. What we're dealing with when we talk about repairing this damage of a legacy of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation, redlining, housing discrimination, expressways, voter suppression, school segregation, etc. We are dealing what we see today with the structural inequities. We are dealing with the cumulative effect of decades of policies. We're dealing with the cumulative effect today of decades of policies. So it was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. Is going to be laws and policies that get us out of it. All right. So a group of researchers found that neighborhoods with higher temperatures were often the same ones subjected to discriminatory race-based housing practices nearly a century ago. In a study of 108 urban areas nationwide, the formerly red-lined neighborhoods of nearly every city studied were hotter than the non-red line neighborhoods, some by nearly 13 degrees. In formerly red line areas, Americans live with hotter temperatures. Okay, now in the 1930s, the federal government rated neighborhoods in urban areas to help mortgage lenders assess risk. Low ratings were determined largely by race and ethnicity. New research in 108 cities shows that today those red line neighborhoods are hotter than other neighborhoods in the same city, with the most drastic difference found in Portland, Oregon. What's interesting about Portland, Oregon, and we talked about this in one of my classes last weekend, is that the state of Oregon banned all free African Americans. Oregon has a deep racist history, which is why Oregon has a very small African American population. Oregon at one point banned all free African Americans. Okay. Then you also have the 1844 Black exclusion laws in Florida, in Oregon as well. Just let me pull this up. Okay, so if we look at this article from Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org, June 26, 1844, Oregon Territory bans free Black people. June 26, 1844, Oregon Territory bans free Black people. On June 26, 1844, the Legislative Committee of the territory, then known as Oregon Country, passed the first of a series of Black exclusion laws. The law dictated that free African Americans were prohibited from moving into Oregon Country. Okay. And those who violated the ban could be whipped, quote, not less than 20, no more than 39 stripes, end quote. Now, so this becomes known as the Peter Burnett Lash Law. It's not really enforced, okay, and then it's going to be repealed. All right. Now, between 1840 and 1860, in the midst of this exclusion and discrimination, African Americans never constituted more than 1% of the population in the American Pacific Northwest. Oregon, which joined the United States as a free state on February 14th, 1859, stands as a clear illustration that racial discrimination and oppression against Black people was also widespread in jurisdictions where slavery was illegal. As of 2018, the U.S. Census Bureau estimated that less than 3% of Oregon residents were African American. Well, see, that's a legacy of going back to what happened in 1844 and after 1844. Okay. Now, the preamble to a later exclusion law passed in 1849 explained legislators' beliefs that, quote, it would be highly dangerous to allow free Negroes and mulattoes to reside in the territory, the Oregon Territory, or to intermix with Indians, instilling feelings of hostility toward the white race. Okay. Now, the Oregon Constitution of 1857 included racial exclusion provisions against African Americans and Asian Americans, because if you actually understand the history of this country, Asian Americans faced racism as well. Wasn't nearly as much as us, but they faced it also. The first anti-drug laws in this country go back to 1875 in San Francisco, targeting Chinese men working on the railroad tracks, and this dealt with opium. Okay, and there was a fear that these Chinese men, if they were high on opium, they would seduce white women. Okay, so when you go study this history, you study like the Chinese exclusion laws of 1882, and different things like this. Asian Americans faced discrimination in this country also. Now, not as much as African Americans. But yes, there's a documented history of that. All right, so read the rest of this article here. Oregon Territory bans free black people, June 26, 1844. Then if we look at, there was another one here from the Washington Post. There was one, let's see. This one here from the Washington Post. It's called "When Portland Banned Blacks, Oregon's Shameful History as an All-White State." This is why it's important to understand history, because laws and policies and history are intersected and interrelated. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay. So your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Laws and policies shape conditions and shape historical events, and movements come about to address the conditions that were created by policies. June 7th, 2017, when Portland banned blacks, Oregon's Shameful History as an All-White State, by Deneen L. Brown for the Washington Post. In Oregon, like I said, this is why Oregon has historically a very, very low percentage of African Americans living in the state of Oregon, less than 3%. There's a good reason for that. In 1844, all black people were ordered to get out of Oregon country, the expansive territory under American rule that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Rocky Mountains. Those who refused could be severely whipped. The provisional government law declared by, quote, not less than 20 or more than 39 stripes to be repeated every 6 months until they left. Now, Oregon country's provisional government, which was led by Peter Burnett, a former slaveholder who came west from Missouri by wagon train, passed the law in 1844, 15 years before Oregon became a state. The law allowed slaveholders to keep their slaves for a maximum of 3 years. After the grace period, all black people, those considered free or enslaved, were required to leave Oregon country. Black women were given 3 years to get out. Black men were required to leave in 2. Now, once again, Peter Burnett, he's going to go on to become the first governor of California, okay, in about 1849. And he's governor when California comes into the Union as a free state in 1850. This is why you got to understand history. If you're going to jump out here, talk about reparations, you need to understand the history of these laws and policies that were put in place that created the harm that you're asking for the repairing of the damage of. Now, the law became known as the Peter Burnett Lash Law, L-A-S-H. Peter Burnett, who also opposed Chinese migration to Oregon country, would later become the first American governor of California. Now, the Lash Law, Peter Burnett Lash Law, was quickly amended and then repealed. No black people were ever lashed under the law. Read the rest of this article here. but this gives you some insight into the results of laws and policies and how they have a lasting impact when it comes to racism and discrimination and current day structural inequities. This is why we have to deal with repairing the damage of the cumulative effect of these policies. Just talking about slavery, that means you don't even understand what happened. Okay, now, if we go back to this piece here from the Associated Press. Okay. Oh, we were looking at, we were looking at the article from National Public Radio. This is dealing with the result of decades of redlining and why why in urban areas, because of racist housing practices from the 1930s, why it's linked to hotter neighborhoods today, higher temperatures in our neighborhoods today, and less trees also. Okay. In a study of 108 urban areas nationwide, the formerly redlined neighborhoods of nearly every city studied were hotter than the non-redline neighborhoods, some by nearly 13 degrees. And it said, with the most drastic difference found in Portland, Oregon. And Oregon has a very racist history towards African Americans based upon their laws. Okay, when they and like going back to 1844, when they banned all free African Americans in Portland, Oregon. Now, redlining refers to the federal government's practice in the 1930s of rating neighborhoods to help mortgage lenders determine which areas of a city were considered risky. The Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created right around 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, made maps and shaded neighborhoods red. They made maps and shaded neighborhoods red that it deemed hazardous. That risk level was largely based on the number of African Americans and immigrants living in those neighborhoods. The practice, along with the other segregationist housing policies of the time, had lasting effects from concentrating poverty to stifling home ownership rates. And we know home ownership is directly tied to generational wealth and being able to pass on assets to your children and future generations, to your family members. Now, you can still feel those effects, literally. Nearly 90 years after those maps were created, redline neighborhoods are hotter than the highest rated neighborhoods by an average of almost 5 degrees. Nearly 90 years after those redlining maps were created, redline neighborhoods are hotter than the highest rated neighborhoods by an average of almost 5 degrees, according to the research from Portland State University, the Science Museum of Virginia, and Virginia Commonwealth University. Okay. Now, Vivek Chandas, a professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University, who co-authored the study, said it's like stepping into a parking lot from a park. You would feel that relatively quickly. It was very surprising when we saw that it was a pattern that we were seeing consistently across the country. It was very surprising when we saw that it was a pattern that we were seeing consistently across the country, end quote. Now, the link between higher heat and redline neighborhoods, many of which are still struggling economically from decades of disinvestment, echoes the findings of a joint investigation last September by National Public Radio and the University of Maryland's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. In an analysis of heat and income in 97 of the most populous U.S. cities, and an analysis of heat and income in 97 of the most populous U.S. cities, we found low-income areas in the vast majority of those cities were more likely to be hotter than their wealthier counterparts. those poor areas were also disproportionately communities of color. The extra heat can be dangerous and sometimes deadly health consequences. The extra heat can have dangerous and sometimes deadly health consequences. Extreme heat kills more Americans every year than any other weather-related disaster. And heat waves are growing in intensity and frequency as climate change progresses. Now, so this deals with the relationship between the harms of climate change, which is then related to policies that dealt with environmental regulations. Okay, this deals with the harm of environmental racism and how this negatively impacts the African American community. And heat waves are growing in intensity and frequency as climate change progresses. In Baltimore, Maryland, National Public Radio, NPR, and the Howard Center found dramatic increases in the rates of emergency calls during dangerous heat waves, and low-income patients in the city's hotspots visited the hospital more often than low-income patients in cooler areas. Okay, read the rest of this here. See, this is understanding the impact of laws and policies. Then you have this article here, right? Because this is the type of research I do. Okay, all different areas. I'm on to about 35 different news sources on a daily basis. We look at this article here. Trees are key to fighting urban heat, but cities keep losing them. Okay. Now, this article from NPR, A Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America, we've dealt with that article here on the African History Network show numerous times. But this article here, September 4th, 2019. So when people read about some of the recommendations from the California Reparations Task Force, and they talk about what the trees have to do with black people, all this all type of simple Simon bullshit coming from people that don't read a damn thing. You got to do some research before you jump out here and start talking about something you ain't never studied before. Okay? There's a direct correlation between that. And that deals with decades of racist, harmful policies towards us. So the structural inequities that we deal with today are the accumulation of all those policies inflicting harm upon us. All right, now, these trees are key to fighting urban heat, but cities keep losing them, keep losing trees. September 4th, 2019, National Public Radio. Let me ask you, everybody watch right now. Who is sharing this type of information with you besides me? I'm just curious. Name them. Where are they? Who's sharing this type of information with you besides me? This is why it's important to support the African History Network and the African History Network show and register for our online classes. Support us through PayPal, Cash App. This helps finance the research. All this don't happen without resources. Okay. You can, if you like this type of information, if you're learning anything here today, you can support us, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Also register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. I'm teaching the class today. We're going to start as soon as I finish this broadcast. We're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes. But I had to, I wanted to follow up on my appearance on Farajii Muhammad's show on Thursday, March 29th, because we only dealt with, we had a short show, a short segment, okay? And I wasn't able to get deep into the information like I wanted to. So on Saturdays, I teach ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, where they didn't teach you in schools. And this class is Saturday, April 1st, April 8th, April 15th, and April 22nd, 2023. Okay. We'll have classes after that also, but these are just some of the next few classes taking place. Normally we do the classes 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today we're starting late, so we're going to finish. We're going to start as soon as I finish this broadcast here. But I want to make sure we got to this broadcast also. Okay. And then on Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement. We go through history chronologically from 1800 to 1968. Understand what leads up to the transatlantic, what leads up to the Civil War taking place. Study the Reconstruction era, Jim Crow era. What were the laws and policies put in place after slavery ended that put us in the predicament we're in today, that created these structural inequities that we're trying to repair the damage of. Okay. So this is at our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. The class is on sale, $80, regularly $120. Also, you can register, let's see, for today's class. If you just want to register for the one class session, it's $10. So click right here to register for the one class session, but you'll want to register for the entire course. Okay. And this information is PG-13 also, so you can use this with your children as well. I don't do a lot of cursing. It's not overly graphic or anything like that. Okay, let me get back to this because I need to finish this up here. Okay, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like, and you can also support us financially through PayPal and Cash App. We're celebrating the 13th year anniversary of me broadcasting the African History Network show as well. So I first broadcasted March 10th, 2013. I'm sorry, March 10th, 2010. March 10th, 2010. So we're celebrating the 13th year anniversary of me broadcasting the African History Network show as well. If we go back to this piece quickly here from National Public Radio. Okay, this deals with trees are key to fighting urban heat, but cities keep losing them. And let's see, let's skip down the tree cover. Trees can play a huge role in the health of people living in cities, but across the country, cities are losing millions of trees year after year. And many poor urban neighborhoods, often home to a city's most vulnerable, are starting at a disadvantage. Jad Daly, president and CEO of the nonprofit organization American Forests, said if we show you a map of tree canopy in virtually any city in America, we're also showing you a map of income. And in many cases, we're showing you a map of race and ethnicity, end quote. Now, the lack of tree cover can make a neighborhood hotter, and a joint investigation by NPR and the University of Maryland's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism found just that. Low-income areas in dozens of major U.S. cities are more likely to be hotter than wealthier counterparts, and those areas are disproportionately communities of color. Okay. Daly went on to say, if you live in an area in cities that is seeing more extreme heat days, but you don't have tree cover to cool down your neighborhood, that can literally be a life or death issue. That can literally be a life or death issue. Quote, the folks who are least likely to have air conditioning to weather heat days, to make it through heat waves, to weather heat waves. The folks who are most likely to have pre-existing health conditions that put them at a greater risk from those heat waves are not getting the benefits of trees, end quote. Now, a study by the Georgia Institute of Technology found Louisville to be getting hotter faster than any of the other 50 largest U.S. metropolitan areas compared with the rural areas around them. One reason cities tend to be hotter is because of fewer trees. Louisville is losing 54,000 trees each year from development, natural disaster, disease, invasive species, and lack of tree care. Okay, Louisville, Kentucky is losing 54,000 trees each year from development, natural disaster, disease, invasive species, and lack of tree care. And Louisville is not alone. From 2009 to 2014, 44 states lost tree cover in urban areas. That's around 28.5 million trees lost every year, according to the U.S. Forest Service. Okay, read the rest of this article here. Okay, so this deals with environmental racism and environmental changes also. All right, let's continue. So if we go back to this one here, okay, financial redress is back to the Associated Press article. California reparations amount, if any, left to politicians. Okay. Financial redress is just one part of the package being considered. Other proposals include paying incarcerated inmates market value for their labor, establishing free wellness centers, and planting more trees in Black communities, banning cash bail, and adopting a K-12 Black studies curriculum, which is extremely important because most of our people don't understand history. Most Americans don't understand history, but especially most African Americans, unfortunately, don't understand history. Now, reparations talks are stalled at the federal level, but the idea flourished in California as well, as U.S. cities and counties, following the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. Governor Gavin Newsom signed the legislation in 2020, creating the Reparations Task Force. Okay, now, let me see here. Where is this? Ooh, did they cut out something in this article? Hold on. Look at that. Oh, let's go scroll down past it. Okay. The $800 billion estimate in California includes a $246 billion to compensate eligible Black Californians whose neighborhoods were subjected to aggressive policing and prosecution in the war on drugs from 1970 to the year 2020, from 1970 to 2020. That would translate to nearly $125,000 each for every person who qualifies, the consultants wrote. Okay. The $800 billion estimate in California includes $246 billion to compensate eligible Black Californians whose neighborhoods were subjected to aggressive policing and prosecution in the war on drugs from 1970 to 2020. Now, the numbers are an approximation based on modeling and population estimates. Now, the economists also included $569 billion to make up for the discriminatory practice of redlining in housing loans. That would amount to about $223,000 per eligible resident from 1933 to 1977. The $569 billion is considered a maximum, and it assumes that all 2.5 million Californians who identify as Black would be eligible. But it's not going to apply to all 2.5 million because the California Reparations Task Force last year voted and decided that reparations would be distributed based upon lineage, not race. So you would have to prove that you were a descendant of an enslaved person who was in the U.S. Who was in the U.S. prior to 1900, or of a free African American person who was in the U.S. prior to 1900. Okay, which would exclude immigrants coming here prior to 1900. Okay, but it goes on to say, but that won't, but they won't all be, they won't all qualify. People must meet residency and other requirements for monetary compensation. They also must be descendants of enslaved and free Black people in the U.S. as of the 19th century, which leaves out Black immigrants. The task force on Wednesday, March 29th, also endorsed methodologies for devaluation of Black businesses and unjust property takings. Those methodologies have no numbers due to a lack of data. All right, so read the rest of this. The specific compensation amounts. Okay, so they have to deliver their last report by July 1st, 2023, which lays out the recommendations. That's going to come from the California Reparations Task Force. Now, the reason why they had to do it based upon lineage is because in California, race-based policies are illegal at the state level. There's a state law in California that bans race-based policies, just like at the federal level, race-based policies are illegal. And that's based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination and federally assisted programs. Okay, so they're doing this they're doing it based upon lineage, so that whatever law they pass, whatever restitution they give, it won't be overturned in court when this gets challenged in court, because it will be challenged in court. They pull up this article here. See, California Reparations Task Force calls for comprehensive reparations. This is June 1st, 2022. And there was also another one. Where's the other one? Well, let's look at this one here. You can look at this article here. California calls for comprehensive reparations for Black Americans. The interim report of the California Reparations Task Force comes as task members remain split on what reparations should look like. This is from June 1st, 2022. And in a 500-page report released Wednesday, a legislatively mandated task force argues that the present-day wealth gap between Black and white Americans in California and the rest of the country is the direct result of slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and other government policies that locked Black Americans into failing schools and over-policed communities. Okay, the task force called its interim report the most extensive document on government discrimination against the Black community since the landmark 1968 Kerner Commission report. It called for the creation of a government office to address past harms and potential future harms and help eligible Black Californians through a reparations program, but it does not put a price tag on its recommendations. This was June of 2022. Okay, that is expected to be detailed later in a second report. Let me see something here. Okay, read the rest of this because I'm running out of time. Yeah, the report also cites the extensive history of sundown towns in California communities that prohibited Black Americans from living within their boundaries. Well, you can, not long could you not live in a sundown town, you can be there after dark. Okay, you may work there in the daytime, but when it starts getting dark, it's time for you to go. Otherwise, you could be stopped, arrested, beaten, or killed. The report says many suburban communities outside of Los Angeles and San Francisco and most Orange County cities were once, quote unquote sundown towns. It also documents the history of urban renewal and highway projects that dismantled once thriving Black neighborhoods like San Francisco's Fillmore district, effectively destroying generations of wealth accumulation. So that Black conservative that's against reparations, he doesn't talk about the harm that the expressway system did all across the country to the African American community. They usually won't talk about things like that. All right. Now, if we just look here at the California reparations, if we look at the executive summary here, it's a 28-page executive summary. And they lay out 12 harms. They identify 12 harms. They show the national laws and policies that inflicted these harms, and then they deal specifically with California. Okay. And let's look at this here. Despite California entering the Union in 1850 as a free state, its early state government supported slavery. Pro-slavery white Southerners held a great deal of power in the state legislature, the court system, and among California's representatives in U.S. Congress. In 1852, California passed and enforced a fugitive slave law that was harsher than the federal fugitive slave law of 1850. And this made California a more pro-slavery state than most other free states. California also outlawed non-white people from testifying in any court case involving white people. California did not ratify the 14th Amendment until 1959, which protected the equal rights of all citizens, and the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from denying a person's right to vote on the basis of race until 1962. Okay, so some of the harms that they lay out, you have political disenfranchisement. So they lay out racial terror, political disenfranchisement, housing segregation, separate and unequal education, racism in environment and infrastructure, pathologizing the black family, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, stolen and hindered opportunity, unjust legal system, mental and physical harm and neglect, and the wealth gap. Okay, these are just some of the harms that they lay out here. And they go through and talk about what happened nationally and then specifically what happened in California. And they deal with these laws and policies. Okay, so check this out. You can go to, let's see here. If you go to, this is the office of the Attorney General, Rob Bonta of California. You go to this website here, which is oag.ca.gov, Office of Attorney General, oag.ca.gov. So Rob Bonta, Attorney General, reparations reports. Okay, this is task force to study and develop reparation proposals. Let's see, let's click right here. But if you go look at this here, reparations reports, you scroll down, it lists the full interim report, which is 500 pages, the executive summary, key findings, and preliminary recommendations. So you can go read this. So we should be forming study groups in our communities to organize our people to really study reparations, study history and law. And this will help us push for this at local levels, but also at the federal level, because I know HR 40 wants a study on reparations. You can use this 500-page study as the foundation. And as I said to on Farajii Muhammad's show, we really should take the term reparations off of what it is that we're fighting for and focus on present-day structural inequities, identify present-day structural inequities, deal with the laws and policies put in place that created these structural inequities, trace those laws and policies back in history. You can trace that back to Jim Crow era Reconstruction, trace that back to slavery, and deal with putting in place laws and policies that correct the structural inequities that are the result of laws and policies. You have to shift the focus away from just talking about slavery. The reason why is because when you just keep talking about slavery, what that does is that makes you a very easy target for opposition. 1, 2, chattel slavery ended about 158 years ago. All the last of the former slaves died in the 1950s. And you bring up greater opposition when you just keep talking about slavery. Deal with present day structural inequities, the laws and policies put in place that created them. And then you also have to market and explain how correcting those structural inequities benefit not just African Americans, but America in general. Because most of the people that got to vote on these policies, generally speaking, are white. Most of the people are from the majority population. White people make up 57% of the U.S. population. Okay, so the whole way a lot of this is marketed and the benefits of this are not marketed correctly. You can't just talk about how this is going to help African Americans when, one, most of the people who have to vote on these policies are white. 1, 2, they have to go justify this to their constituents back home. 2, 3, it's not just African American dollars, taxpayer dollars, that are going to pay for these policies. It's largely going to be taxpayer dollars coming from non-white people, from non-African American people that pay for these policies. So you got to understand how to market this. Lastly, if we look at this article here that I reference a lot, because this is a good example of what I'm talking about. This is from CBS News, okay? And stand by, let's see. Okay, this is from CBS News. This deals with how the U.S. economy has lost $16 trillion over a 20-year period of time. And it's due to racism. Okay, so this is why we have to do the research and understand what it is that we're talking about. Okay, the root concept of reparations deals with the repair, the damage of something. You have to analyze the history of what happened and the damage that was done to understand the laws and policies that have to be put in place to repair the damage. Okay, just cutting a check does not address correcting those laws and policies. Those laws and policies will still be in place, inflicting harm after you spend the money. Okay, racism has cost the U.S. $16 trillion Citigroup fines, September 23rd, 2020. Okay, from CBSnews.com. And let me close out all these damn ads keep popping up. America could have been $16 trillion richer if not for inequities in education, housing, wages, and business investment between Black and white Americans over the past 20 years, new research concludes. The study released this week by Citigroup is the latest in a body of research that attempts to quantify the economic impact of systemic racism. These are things that we have to talk about, quantifying the economic impact of systemic racism and showing that evidence. Citigroup arrived at a $16 trillion figure after estimating that, one, Black workers have lost $113 billion in potential wages over the past 2 decades because they could not get a college degree. Okay, so that reduces the spending potential of African Americans, whether it's buying homes, buying cars, things like this, that helps the GDP grow, helps the gross domestic product of the U.S. grow. The housing market lost $218 billion in sales because Black applicants could not get home loans, About $13 trillion in business revenue never flowed into the economy because Black entrepreneurs could not access bank loans. What's more, the U.S. could have $5 trillion in gross domestic product over the next 5 years if those gaps and others were closed today, the study indicated. So the U.S. economy could grow by $5 trillion over the next 5 years by changing those laws and policies, by correcting them. That helps everybody in the country. That's not just African Americans. That helps everybody. All right, so check out this article. Racism has cost the U.S. 16 trillion Citigroup fines. All right. Okay, if you'd like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And you can register for the online classes that I teach, because we're teaching them Saturday, April 1st. I'm going to teach it now, about to jump out of here. And I teach this online class Saturday, April 1st, April 8th, April 8th, 15th, and 22nd. Okay, so visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. We have the information there, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We do thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place also. And then Sundays, I teach from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement, Black resistance movements, from the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, and Haitian Revolution, 1800 to 1968. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora.